Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everybody, welcome back. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses the things that schools may not have prepared you for. Across me is Jason. I'm AJ. Jason, how you doing, buddy?
Killing it, AJ. Today's a great day.
Yeah, I'm excited for today. I mean, I got my cup of coffee ready. I'm excited for this episode. This is the episode where I felt like I was the most confident going through the interview process.
Well, you said before that you love the actual interview itself. If you can get there, you feel like you've got the job.
I did. I mean, it was just one of those. I think I'm comfortable around people, so it kind of helped me in the ability to just sit in front of somebody and talk. And I always felt like I had a good ability to just calm situations down, make things comfortable. So,
well, let's remind everybody, this is the second part to our interview series, right? First, we went through kind of structure, that type of thing, things you should prepare ahead of time, that type of stuff. This is the substance of what goes on in the interview. Yeah, we give a little bit more structure stuff, but we'll talk about that in a second. But before we do, let me remind everybody, Reschool'd.com. Visit our website, check out our latest episodes, old episodes. This stuff is evergreen, right? It doesn't go away. So anyway, check out our stuff. Hit us on the social media channels. We want to hear from you. Send us a message. Let us know what's going on with you. But also, that's where we get our questions from, right? The things that you want to hear about, that's how you let us know. And of course, your favorite podcasting apps, right? You got to like us, get notifications when we drop new episodes. If you really do like us, give us that 5-star, because that's what's going to help us, take over the universe. So
that's the plan.
Yeah, right. So, all right, you ready to get into this?
Let's do it. Let's get into the quick question. Last quick question, I think we just said, what is the funniest thing we've ever seen in an interview or heard in an interview? Mm-hmm. Because this one's dealing with more of the substance of the interview, so the questioning, let's take it more poignant and say, what's the funniest question you've ever heard asked or answered during an interview?
Oh, this one was great. This small business I was helping was doing an interview, and for some reason they wanted me in on it, just I guess to make sure they didn't ask any questions that would get them into legal trouble.
Oh yeah,
scenario. So I was in on it, and they asked the person what their spirit animal was.
Oh wow,
yeah.
Yeah.
You know what the answer was?
No, what?
Taylor Swift.
That was a spirit animal. Wow.
It was amazing. I was like, everybody just fell over laughing. Like
nothing says spirit animal like a little T-swizzle.
Yeah, the woman didn't have to even blink. I mean, it was
instant, huh?
Yeah. What's your spirit animal? Oh, Taylor Swift.
Like she'd been thinking of that too. Like
right.
Like, at home, she's like, my spirit animal.
Tip of tongue, right? So there you go. That was the funniest I'd ever heard.
My funniest one that I've got two. One of my best friends, he was going through an interview and he was asked the question, would you rather be the hammer or the nail? And I thought, man, how would you answer that question? Like I could see, you'd have to come up with a strength to explain for either one of them. And I could not in my head figure out what would be a good strength that doesn't sound beyond stupid.
Well, let's be real here. Most people are going to want to be the hammer, but the question is, how do you explain that you'd rather smack somebody else than get smacked?
Exactly.
To the people you're about to work for, hopefully.
It was just, and then I will say this, when I had my business, because my business, we were dealing, one of the things that you had to be creative, but you had to be creative very quickly. And it needed to be somewhat realistic. Like you couldn't be creative in the sense of you're just making this outlandish excuse of something that could never happen. It needed to be realistic. And I actually, in my interview, I asked the question, how many tennis balls do you think could fit in a limo?
And that's a good question.
Obviously I wasn't looking for the exact answer, but I just wanted to see how quickly they can come up with a reasonable answer. Like if they would have said 4 million, then it's just not reasonable.
So that is a great segue into the types of questions you ask. I mean, that is a estimation, a case-based question in itself, but we're going to talk about different types here in a minute. So,
well, let's get into the main then, because I'm looking forward to this. I love this area. It's one of those things that, it's one of those things. Fortunately, you don't have to do too much once you get your job, unless you're trying to move jobs. But it's always good to get practice. Like, I used to go to interviews when I was in college for jobs that, had they gave me enough, or had they give me, that the package would have been good, I probably would have taken it. Mm-hmm. But I also just like to have that experience to go through it. So it's always good to just get that practice too. Let's go through the types of interviews, because there are different types of interviews, like, where they're being held, who's doing the interview, the levels at which you go through. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that first.
That's important. Get a good understanding of what to expect. Now, a lot of small, mid-sized jobs, 60% of hiring in the U.S. is small, mid-sized job, right?
Yep.
Mid-sized employer is what I'm saying. They're not going to have all these formal levels of interview like you do in other large Fortune 500 companies. But 40% of the people in the United States work for Fortune, I think, 1,000 right at companies, right? They do the majority of the hiring because they're enormous. Now, that being said, what is their interview process? So now they're so big, and when they post a job, it goes across the internet and blah, blah, blah. They had to target more on how they hire across the nation to get the talent that they're bringing in. And most of these companies bring in non-experienced hires through their internship program. That is the number one way they hire. If you look for job postings for recent graduates, you hardly find any in the professional service realm, right? So that being said, where they, the jobs that they do post out there for experiential hires, people with 1 to 10 years experience, whatever, right, for specific jobs, they source them through recruiters. Now, these can be internal or external recruiters, but it's kind of like this independent unit. Normally, it's external recruiters now. They basically say, we want somebody for these positions, okay? They source it out to a recruiter. Recruiter gets paid a percentage of the individual's first-year salary as a finder's fee, right? Kind of a commission, if you will. So they're out there trying to find good candidates to recommend to the company. So that's how LinkedIn is used. Approximately 90% of these recruiters use exclusively LinkedIn for this purpose, and that's why LinkedIn is such an amazing tool. So anyway, in another episode where we talk about LinkedIn, right, we give you that full breakdown and all that kind of stuff. But the thing to remember here is when you have recruiters doing this, they have to screen people first. They have to get a subject pulled together to recommend to the company. So your first level of interview, oftentimes when you apply for these jobs on Monster, Indeed, Simply Hired, these hiring platforms, you're applying to the recruiter, not the actual company yet. So that being said, the questions that you're going to get to start with are from the recruiter. So those are going to be like screening questions, trying to determine competency and trying to determine personality and fit for the position because they're trying to narrow you down to a group. Now, they're not going to be technically proficient in what you're going to be doing. So competence in terms of you proving that you can do these things, they just want to understand that you meet the requirements. So that's the first thing. All right. So this screening interview you get with the recruiter. Once you get past that and you're part of that group that they recommend to the company, next you've got the meeting with it could be HR, right? And it could have another screening function again, but that's not quite as common. Okay. If they used an external recruiter, it is more common that then, okay, you might have another screening type interview with HR. But that being said, the next interview is always with the people you'll be working with. And it's almost always a group interview. Now, group interviews, as you know, AJ, are tougher, right?
Yeah. They're a lot of fun.
Yeah, a lot of people in the room, you got to do that eye connecting with multiple people. You got to shift your body to look at people while you're addressing them, and you're trying not to in any way offend or alienate anybody there, but include it's just physically taxing, right? So anyway, that being said, so you got that group interview, and then the next stage, right? And this happens in almost all Fortune 500 companies. You have the first group you're going to be working with. Then after that, you interview with somebody who's a higher up, a single individual who's kind of like the department head or something like that. And between those two, that's normally where the decision, the recommendation is made whether to hire you or not. After that, oftentimes you'll meet with somebody very high up, a vice president, a mid-size, you might even meet with the CEO, depending on the nature of the company. And normally, if their people below them have made the recommendation, like any good leader, they're like, well, I'm going to go with the recommendation of my people, right? But they're just looking for something that makes them want to give the thumb down, like Caesar up there, right? Thumbs up, thumbs down. You've come in with the idea that you're going to get the thumbs up, right? You've come in with the recommendation from the people below you. You only got that interview with the higher up, the executive, because you have been recommended for hire. Just don't mess it up at that point, right?
No kidding.
Don't do anything that is going to get you excluded. Extreme comments, extreme opinions, coming in saying how you're going to change things, that is the worst thing in the world, right?
Yeah,
So anyway,
don't go in there and go, I want your job.
right. That is the structure. You will typically see anywhere from 3 to 5 levels of internship with a big company like that. So that's what we're here to tell you about. We're here to prepare you for that, right? Like how do they arrange that? Well, oftentimes if you get the interview and stuff, they will fly you out.
Yep.
They'll put you up in a hotel lots of times, and generally the interview happens over 2 days. If you make it to the second day, that's when you meet with the executive. During that first day, it's always, the people you're going to be working with and then their superior.
Yeah, and to bring it back to what you were saying about the group, that one group one,
Mm-hmm.
and to kind of keep it, I guess you'd say, on brand for me, like dealing with a strategy. There is a whole different level of strategy that you're going to use or try to use for a group interview that you would or you may not use for a single person interview. Because a single person, you can relate to them very well. You can read the room very easily. And there's only one personality that you really have to read. So if they have a very outgoing, bubbly personality, you can have that same outgoing, bubbly personality. Whereas in a group, if you have one person that's a miser and one person that's bubbly, it's really hard to feed off of one without, sometimes people are introverted and their energy goes down as other people's energy goes up. And so it could come off wrong in that situation. So you really kind of have to play the balancing game from the strategy side when it's a group setting. And it gets really, really taxing. And most of the time what I tell people who ask and what I do for myself when I go into these interviews that's group is the best thing you can do is be yourself. Because if you try to act like something else, you try to use too much strategy to become somebody who you're not, you may, it may work for you, but that's not who you are. And if they're going to hire you or they're not going to hire you, I want it to be based off of who I am, not who I'm trying to be. Now, strategy, again, comes into bigger play when you have the individuals. That's different. And again, I'm not changing who I am. I'm just being able to read the room and react to them differently or make them do things that's going to make them feel a little bit more comfortable in the situation. It's not as awkward.
Sure. The one piece of advice I get people to try to calibrate that, right? Because you do have to read the room. I tell them that if anybody hates you, like really dislikes you as a candidate, you're not going to get the job.
Yep.
If everyone loves you, 3 people love you, one person kind of doesn't like you, and I'm not going to say hate, right? They don't even have to go that far. If one person does not like you, that is, they are willing to voice that they do not want you as a candidate, you won't get the job.
Yep.
You won't get the recommendation to the next level. Usually people are not willing to fight for a candidate when they don't know you, right? You're not somebody that they're going to lay their name on the line type scenario. So if one person, so that being said, that moderating function there of like, what am I going to say? Like I need to filter this in a way that need to make sure I'm not going to offend anybody, right? So you're kind of toning down the things you're going to say. So it is better to be favorable to everybody than loved and definitely not loved by at least one person. So anyway, with that being said, it just echoes the reason for your concern for strategy.
Well, next question, and this one's probably going to be a pretty lengthy question because we're going to go kind of in depth in these, but let's go with it a 2-part question. So there are different types of questions that could be answered in an interview.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about these different. Yeah, let's talk about these different types, and then let's talk about kind of give like a short kind of approach to how you would answer that type of question, because each of these are going to have different methods that you're going to use to get the most out of your answer. You can answer them in any way you want, but to get the most strength from your answer, there's different approaches that you can use. So let's go through these. I'll start with the first one. Okay. Verification. Verification is probably the most common one because they want to know, where you came from school wise. It's just questions to say, verify with me where you graduated from, verify with me what you've done in the past. It is just making sure that what you have on your resume is truly what you did and you know it. And it's not a bunch of, it's not fluff. You're not embellishing it too much. You can back it up. You can explain things and you can give evidence.
And normally that is the default that you're going to see in every interview. And it always starts the same way. Take me through your resume.
Yep.
I'm looking here at you worked at so you graduated from what they're doing there, wanting to hear from you what your resume already told them, right? They're verifying what they see in front of them and already believe about you in terms of what they've deduced from your resume and your cover letter. So
It is essentially, is it not essentially the same thing as when you go to a bar with a fake ID and the bouncer says, "What's your birth date?" and you give them the wrong birthday?
Yeah, in a way, right? I would say it's a little more in depth than that, just by virtue of, they've got this impression about you that they've artificially created. They've got a piece of paper here, or two pieces of paper, that pretty much tell them everything they know about you, but everybody forms an opinion. They've got a mental image of you, so they want you to take them through it, and they want to hear it in your words, because they may see you as a very different person after you start explaining your history, your past, that type of thing. But I will tell you this, make certain whatever you did, and we have 2 episodes on resume and cover letter. They're very good. Go back and listen to them.
Obviously, they're good.
Yeah, right. Between what you're doing in those documents, know them cold. Whatever you put in that cover letter, have studied it. Whatever you have on that resume, be able to talk about it in detail. That's the essence of your verification question.
Okay. Next type of question would be opinion. Give us some insight on that.
So this one's trouble. Okay, this one's trouble. Now, I've told you before, and we said this last time in the interview. Normally, what you're trying to do is demonstrate fit, even though the employer, the person interviewing you, lots of times does not realize it. They are going to gravitate towards people like themselves. We call it implicit bias. Okay. And if your underlying objective in the interview is to create some kind of personal connection, to endear yourself to the person that you're interviewing with. And again, we talk about this in our last episode on this topic. I want you to think about it, right? What could in some way take you the other direction? What could make them not see eye to eye with you? Make them feel like you are not a good fit with the organization. Okay. Extreme opinions. Okay. Stay away from things that are politically charged, right? You know the classic things that they tell you not to talk about over a dinner table?
Yes.
Politics, religion, and sex, right? Those are just really emotionally charged topics. Same thing in an interview. You've got to be really, really careful. Now, lots of times your interviewer is not so coy about that. They will throw in topics, political and whatnot. My recommendation to you, and AJ, you may have a different approach than this, but is to dance, right? Try not to commit. Don't contradict anything that they say if they throw out an opinion. But if they cold ask you for opinion, right? Be neutral, middle of the road, right? Just show that you understand whatever the primary, position is that people can take. Like, what is the question at heart, right? Saying things like, let me give you an example, saying things like, well, I know one side is blah, 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 arguing this, okay? A lot of, there's obviously some reason, but a lot of holes in that. But the other side's complete opposite, saying this, and that's obviously has a lot of issues as well between the two. I try not to get into it too much because I don't want to argue about it. Everybody's got their personal opinions and things like that. But it's going to be interesting to see how it comes out. So I am definitely following that, or I am definitely interested in that type of thing. Shows you're knowledgeable, shows you're level-headed. It actually kind of presents yourself as somebody who can deal well with different types of people. So when it comes to opinion-based questions, that's one of the better approaches you can take.
Yeah, I was going to say, it almost sounds like you're saying talk out of both sides of your mouth.
Yeah.
You're just, because that was actually a question I was going to bring up to you. Is like, say you're in an interview with someone and it's your dream job. It's some job that you really want, and they ask you a question, a politically driven question, for instance, and you look around the room and you can read the room and you can see where this person would most likely land on the political spectrum. Are you going to go, assuming that your opinion is different than theirs, are you going to say what's going to make them happy? more likely to get you the job, or are you going to give your own opinion, or are you just going to, like you said, dance? Because again, dancing may not be what they want to hear too. I mean, they may just want confirmation bias.
Well, that's going to be up to you. Again, I'm never going to recommend to somebody that you compromise your core beliefs and morals to get a job in this scenario. So now, if you don't believe that that's the predominant view of the company, or you're talking to somebody you might be working beside rather than below type scenario, then you may be more, I don't know, prone to, in that moment, accept their point of view or act in a way that, as if you agree with them, just to, remain in favor, that type of thing. Where obviously, but if it's something that's you truly believe in type scenario, even that might be repugnant to you. So being false in that way, right, I have a hard time recommending that to anyone. But like you say, strategy is strategy. Everybody has different personality types, and you can't assume anything about, the scenario is going to change. What you want is this, one of the most critical things in your career to get this job, right? Like if it's a closed industry like music or literature or film or something like this, this may be your only shot type scenario. So is it worth it to you to maybe not be totally truthful in your opinion on something like that? If it doesn't go to the core of who you are, you really don't have that strong of a feeling about whatever the subject matter is. So anyway, again, it's going to be up to you, right? But I will say this: don't tell a lie, right?
No, yeah.
Liars have to have a very good memory, and it is extremely difficult to keep that up. Okay, and nothing erodes trust, and it's difficult to overcome in the long run than, like I say, breaching that trust by telling a lie. So anyway, be careful with that.
Next one would be, actually, it's kind of, you can call it behavioral. You can also call it reactive, reactions towards things. These are super common because they want to see how you've dealt with something in the past. Mm-hmm. And with these, it's more of them asking, okay, give me a specific example of this occurring and how you dealt with it. These are wanting to see, and these are very kind of straightforward. They're going to ask you, okay, have you had a time where a customer, an unruly customer, came into your store, and how did you deal with that? They're wanting to see how you deal with those kind of things.
Two ways. They'll look backwards and they'll look in the present. They'll say, okay, how would you?
Yep.
Or give me an example of how you did, right? So,
and this one has, I would say, answering these questions, there's a very straightforward, I guess you would say is another, same word. There's a very good way to answer this, and this is using the STAR technique.
Yes, that is the predominant behavior-based approach. STAR is just an acronym: situation, task, action taken, result, right? Yep. Very simple. So you can apply that to the situation very well. It tends to be used better for past situations. So you're describing the situation, because if it's hypothetical right now, like this never happened, like how would you react, right? That type of thing. You can still use that approach, but basically the idea is you got to organize yourself. If you're going to attack this, be organized so you don't jump all about or make yourself look like you're disorganized or make your answer incoherent, right? So.
And with these questions too, I would say especially with that one, because it is a structure in which you give the answer. If they ask this question, it's okay to take a minute to get your thoughts together, to get them structured in your head before you start speaking it. That way they know that you're somebody, one, who can think before they speak, and two, you can put things together in a way that is going to get the point across in a quick way. So it's not bad to just sit there for a moment and collect your thoughts and then give the answer. A lot of times they don't expect you to get these, just right off the cuff, especially in that structure, in that STAR structure. I'd never heard of the STAR structure until my wife went through an interview, and they said, okay, we're going to ask you some questions. Here are the possible questions that you can answer, or you can ask, or we're going to ask, and we want you to give us the answer in the STAR method. I'd never heard of it, and I looked it up, and she is somebody who prepares a lot. Like she prepared 3 weeks in advance for this interview, and she wrote out paragraphs for each one of them to show, okay, this is the situation, this was the task, this is the action I took, and this was the results. And I was floored when she did that, when I saw all the writing that she was doing for that job, because she asked me, what would you have done? I said, I'd have gone in there cold. And I probably would have failed that one because I'd never heard of that method. So knowing that, it would have helped me now, or it would help me now, knowing going into it that it's something that you do need to formulate. At least have some in your back pocket.
Well, it is going to be your best friend, especially in the most difficult type of interview, that group interview. It is so difficult to create that personal connection. You're going to be staying on situational questions the entire time. These behavior-based, reaction-based, they're kind of the same thing, right? They'll give you the scenario or ask you for the situation. So you need to be as organized as possible. I tell people all the time, you need to, going into this, identify these types of situation, behavioral-based questions. And, hit my microphone there. So you need to go in prepared to use experiences from your life to explain situations or scenarios. And what I mean by that is you can take any experience you've had in your past and say, this taught me something about leadership. This taught me something about what it means to fail. This was an example of how I succeeded. This was a learning experience. This was how I had, this was an example of something that changed my mentality on something. And it can be the exact same story. It's just how you tell it, right? How you let that information out. So people who are good at that, they will sit down and they will organize it that way. This was the situation. This was what I had to do, what I felt like I needed to do. This was the action I took, and this was the result. And where you can change it is the result, right? So what you realized from it, what you saw, what the outcome was. If you focus on the outcome, you might have lost, right? But if the result was you learned this and then you spun it turned into this later, right? So failure turned into victory. Or you say, look, well, this was a scenario where I did lead people, right? Or this is where I failed people where I should have. And so in the result, so you take this exact scenario, you craft it in a way to answer the question you're looking for. Now, you're going to have multiple questions. So to take these experiences from your past life, to write them out, to organize them in that way, knowing there's that decision tree of alternative endings or alternative ways you can use it for these types of questions, that's going to be your best bet. And have 4, 5, 6, 7 stories from your life, right? These can be stories of things you did while you were in school. Were you in a sports team? Were you in a club? Were you part of a competition? Were you family matters, social groups, things like that, scenarios. The time you got picked on the playground and got beat up. The time you got picked on the playground and stood up for somebody else, or you band together with other people, that type of thing. So even the most otherwise seemingly unimportant situations can be good answers, good examples to these types of questions. And remember, always dish them out in a way that makes sense so they're organized, but that resonates with the people that ask you. Okay? Try to make it in a way emotional. You're trying to in some way relate to them, because any story you tell, if you tell it well enough, people begin to visualize it on the other side, right? You've heard that about being a good storyteller or a good writer.
Yep.
You create that mental image of what's happening in the other person's mind. If you do that in the right way, that other person will start to see themselves in that situation. Who were they in that situation, right? Normally it's going to be you're painting them as in your position, right? If you can do that, you have knocked that one out of the park. Now, not preparing is not your friend on this one, because just that aspect of establishing fit does not help you in these situations. This is where you can really, trip yourself, as they say. So
yeah, and this one probably, as we said, this is probably going to be most of your questions. Like this is where they're going to start learning more about you, especially using the STAR technique of what you have done, and that's what they're really going to kind of gear towards. The next one, I'll let you take this one, which is the competency questions or test kind of style questions.
Yeah, so that just flat out proves that you can do what you say you can do. Most of the time, this comes up in highly technical fields. They'll give you an example. My brother is a technologist, okay? they gave him a scenario where he had to, and I don't know much about computer programming, and I don't know much about database structure, and that's what he does. He does primarily database structuring and stuff like that. So information transfer and how that's handled by different systems. That's all I know about it. But that is highly, highly technical. Okay. So not only do you have to speak another language, i.e., coding language, multiple coding languages sometimes, right? Because different systems talk to each other and they kind of pile on top of each other, the types of languages you're coding, but you have to understand systems. Now, you can say, and there is so much room for embellishment in this field, that you worked in this type of environment doing these type of things. But that can be true, but you didn't do the technical stuff, right? Or you didn't do, and if they need specifically a skill set, they will oftentimes give you these competency tests to prove that you can do that. So they gave him a scenario and said, here, show us how you would do this. And he sat there and he had to draw lines of code and he had to do, a structural diagram to show this is how data would be transferred. Well, there you go, right? If you can't do it, you can't do it. If you need to do analysis, right? AJ, I know you're learning, some research and analysis methods now. If
learning is a bit of a stretch of a word.
I mean, they may give you a data set and say, all right, here's whatever program you're using. Use this program to do a multivariate regression analysis. And you have to be able to do that, right? You said you could do it, so prove it, right? Language is a big one. Anytime they say someone has to have a level of proficiency in language, expect that there will be somebody there who starts talking to you in that language, maybe situation-based again, where they try to determine whether you have the skill set to do this job. So anyway, there you go. That's it. I mean, you're going to have it in the physical realm, right? Firefighters need to be able to carry this much weight up a flight of stairs. Other people might need to be able to run, type scenario.
I thought it'd be really cool to try out for the FBI until I realized that you had a 5-mile run to do that. I was like, you know what? I don't think I want to do that anymore.
Yeah, there's a lot of physical requirements there, right? You want to join the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the DEA, any of these, groups that have, I don't know, strenuous physical requirements on new agents. Well, yeah, I mean, that's going to be a competency type test. It's not just mental, it can be physical as well. So
next type of question is probably my favorite one, just because I can add maybe the most personality to it. And that's the creativity and sometimes nonsensical questions. Those are the ones that we were just talking about with the quick question, what's the funniest questions? Those are the ones that the creativity side really, I mean, most of them have a reason or a rationale behind them. It may not be obvious or it may not be intuitive to the person who is trying to answer the question, but there typically is a reason behind it. So they may ask you to do some quick math in your head to see if you can do, just math very quickly, or do you rely on a calculator? Or, like I said, the tennis balls in a limo. The purpose of that was to see if you can come up with a reasonable answer in a short amount of time, because maybe your job is reliant on that. The nonsensical ones are more of like what you were talking about, what's your spirit animal, or what color best describes you? Those kind of questions. And to me, with those questions, they're the underlying effect of it is they're just trying to see the creativity side of it and how well you can, answer these questions with a reasonable justification. Like, if you just say one color, then you're not getting anything out of it. They want to see how you can take that and describe it in a way that makes sense to someone else.
Right.
Again, they're not typically, they're, like it says, nonsensical. I mean, they're not huge questions, but they do have some important meaning. So you don't want to dismiss them, but you're not going to see them all too often. You may see one, maybe two, if you're unlucky, depending on how you look at it, in an interview. But I don't expect to see those much at all.
Yeah, so they're not terribly common. They're in very specific fields. You might see them in consulting type fields. Mainly in consulting, you see the case-based stuff, which we'll talk about here last. That's kind of a subcategory of creative. There are also creative positions in marketing, right? That type of thing. Anybody who's seen Mad Men, right? I don't think it exactly works like that anymore. I had a conversation with an acquaintance who is in that field, right? And in that same environment, and it's not exactly like it used to be. Thank God a lot of the misogyny and stuff like that's gone. But anyway, that being said, you'll still have these creative type questions. Like, here's a picture they'll give you and say, tell me what's happening in this story. Make up the story behind it and tell me the story, right? You have to come up with things novel, non-obvious right there off the top of your head. Okay. So anyway, there you go. That's the creativity type. And you'll know if that's the type of position you're applying for.
Well, go ahead and take on the next one, which is the case-based. You just mentioned it. So let's hear that one. That's the last one.
So case-based, that is 99% of the time, you're only going to do these if you're going into consulting, management consulting or strategy consulting. Okay. It is just their method of trying to identify, one, they believe there's some tie there to acumen, to general intelligence, meaning your ability, your aspects of creativity, the extent to which you can come up with approaches to things, but also your learned knowledge, your ability to structure information in a way to come up with a logical outcome. Like AJ, you gave a perfect example. You didn't even know you were doing it. But that was a case-based scenario, right, with the tennis balls.
Oh, yeah.
That was an estimation exercise, right? And a very common one that you'll see, and by the way, there are lots of case-based style questions. And if you are going to approach these, you have to study it. Yeah. Because these accepted approaches you'll see across the board. There's more or less 7 different types of questions that you will see in case-based interviews. And there's several books. One of them is Crack the Case. Another one's Case in Point. But there are several books on how to get into consulting. And they take you through approaches to answer these case-based questions. Now, I'm not going to say if you're going into internal strategy in a corporation, which is very hard to do if you have not been in consulting. Okay. That room is just full of consultants. Okay. So to get into internal strategy, right? That's usually the people they pull from that are the consultants that are working, with the company. They steal them away from the consulting firms. All right. The biggest consulting firms in strategy are obviously McKinsey's number 1, but then Bain and Boston Consulting Group are number 2. And then you have all the others that are right below it, right? Your Ernst & Young, IBM, Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCooper, just the long list. There are hundreds. I've actually assembled a list at one point. I have a side website called thebusinessprofessor.com where I explain business concepts and topics, right? And I have one in there that has a list of the top 100 consulting firms. So anyway, that being said, all right, to get back on this case-based thing, give you an example, and it's very similar to AJ's. So if you were to say, AJ, give me an example of a product, and you're trying to see if you should launch this product or not. So give me an example. Make up something off the top of your head, a type of product, and ask me what are your considerations in whether you should pursue this as a potential venture.
We don't have enough time for this. We're coming up short on time. It would take me a little while to do this.
I'm not asking you to do all that.
Thank
just
God.
Come up with a product. No, just come up with a product. I'm gonna walk you through it.
I don't know. Some kind of technology. Let's go with toilet paper with Bluetooth.
Bluetooth toilet paper. All right. So
where
should we launch this? Well, first, with any product there. So what are you going to ask, right? And this is a business scenario. So what are you going to ask? You got a product. You don't want to create a product that tries to find an audience, right? You want to make certain that the audience is there first, the potential customer market. So, well, one, you're talking about a huge group. How many people in the United States use toilet paper? Well,
I would hope all of them.
Yeah. Well, not all of them. Not all of them.
I mean, I guess not all of them.
Some of them use wipes, right?
Yeah.
Some of them use
that's
wipes.
True.
So you've got a certain percentage of the population that are below 2 years old that are not going to use toilet paper. Well, if the average age group in the United States is between 0 and 80, and let's just assume they're distributed equally across. I know we're heavy on the top end, the baby boomer generation and all, but let's just assume they're equal across. So if 2-year-olds and below, that's 1/40 of the population isn't going to use it. There's 320 million people in the United States. If you divide that by 40, or let's do it 4, 8, 16, 24, 32. So 1/8 of 320 million, right? And I would do the math on a piece of paper real quick and say, okay, so it reduces it back this much. We're roughly 290 to 300 million people. So let's just round it off as your total market there is 300 million people. Now, how many people are technologically savvy in this way? You're going to have to cut this down again because, again, at what point do you get old enough to be able to use Bluetooth? I would say probably not until you're about 12 years old. So again, you're cutting out another group, 5 2-year spans, or between 12 and let's say older people, anybody 70 to 80, right, is not going to use it again. So you've cut out 20% roughly of that 300 million people. All right. So again, 20%, that's 60 million. You got 240 million people who could possibly use this in some way, just technologically, right? Now, you have the average household size is about 4 people. So the same toilet paper is going to be sold to the same household. So how many people are going to be buying this? To start with, you divide that by 4 again if you're down to 240 million. So you got about 60 million potential customers out there, the people who are doing the buying for the household, all right, on average. So these are the people you're going to have to attract. Now, who is primarily doing the buying in the household? Well, okay, it's probably going to be someone of this demographic personality. And you break it down, say, let's assume that 20% of men do the buying because of historical practices, 80% are women. Now, who is more inclined to use Bluetooth devices? You do that research and say, all right, what is the consumer preferences towards Bluetooth, right, or electronic devices particularly. And then you try to do some secondary market analysis and say, to what extent is there acceptance of technology within these intimate environments like this, right? Lots of times, it's going to be more mechanical stuff rather than technologically related. Because once again, what if something messes up? Okay, so you're going to have consumer preference stuff you go down there, but we've kind of narrowed it down to we've got 60 million people that we can approach with this potential product. Now, who are our competitors? How many brands out there do we have, right? So would you consider this very expensive? Probably so. It's technologically related versus something. So to what extent you do the economic analysis and say, is there elasticity of demand? Right? To what extent does, when the price of something rises, do people get away from it? Right? That type of thing. Now, I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here, and nothing about what I'm saying could be right. But does it show that I have a structured approach to how I'm dealing with this? It shows that I'm very organized in the things I'm looking at, the way I'm trying to divide it down and stuff like that. That's a case-based interview. Now, I went through that whole sample there and took 5 minutes doing it, I guess, just to try to entertain the crowd out there and understand what goes into being a consultant.
I've never heard somebody speak 5 minutes on toilet paper.
Yeah, right. And so that is what you will actually do. And with your example, with the tennis balls, right, with your question in the interview, you weren't looking for the real right answer. You just wanted to be able to say, like, look, what type of car is it? Are we talking about an SUV where you're probably talking about this square footage in the back, this square footage in the rear seats, this square footage in the front, normal size, windows up, things are putting in one by one. Here's the diameter of the ball. If you divide this by this, it's probably going to be this number. And you could be off by a scale of 10, but if they knew to do that type of analysis, that might have been the person you were looking for. Or you might have looked for somebody who was creative and offered something else, like said that, well, I've seen this before. I've seen people fill it with confetti because of this, and normally that requires, or, that type of thing. Or the truck bed of a pickup truck where I come from, can do this many pounds of sawdust, to put in a horse's lot or a cow's lot, so it holds this. It's got to be at least twice that size. So I'd say 2 dump loads, which equals this square footage. Right. So it would be either they focused on experience, they'd focus on an analysis portion, they'd be creative in some type of way. And all that stuff, it just comes back to what they're trying to see in the interview. Yeah. Now, I know we took a turn down right turn down an otherwise straight road here to going into these examples. But I hope this illustrates for those listeners out there that this is how you do certain types of interviews. And I hope it shows the level of preparation you would need right? To be
Yeah,
able to prepare
definitely.
yourself to address answers or answer questions like this, because otherwise, right, you can paint yourself in the wrong light.
Well, we're coming up on time, and I wanted to get to this last piece, which is, do we have any tips for interviews? More so, again, the substance of the interview, the questionings part. I have one that's really big on me, and it's one that I think you're probably going to hear most interviews. It's the biggest to me. It's the biggest setup question that can be asked of an interviewee, and that is just, what is your biggest weakness? I mean,
Mhm.
I've seen it on paper versions of applications. I've seen it in almost every interview that I've done to some extent. I mean, they may word it differently, but it is one of the ones that I think gives people the most trouble, because it could be the defining piece that gets you written off from that job. It's not going to get you hired, but it can quickly get you written off. And there
Mhm.
is a way to answer this question. It is, but first, there's a couple things you need to keep aware of. Rule number one is never answer this question with these two answers: I have no weakness, or I work too hard. That's a bunch of baloney.
Yeah.
And they know it. They know if you say that, they have just written you off. Don't say those examples or those answers. What you need to do is you need to find a weakness, and this actually does take a little bit of soul searching. You need to find a weakness that has some kind of indirect relationship with the position that you're doing. So if you are trying to become, like for us, if you're trying to become a teacher, okay, you're not going to say, I'm not good at, I'm not a people person. That's probably the worst thing you could say. And it's
Yeah.
going to get you written off pretty quick.
Or
You want
no,
to say
low
something,
patience. Low
yeah,
patience.
yeah,
That's not going to
exactly.
help.
You want to say something that is got some kind of indirect link to it, and use that so that you're not putting a focus on a major aspect of the job that you're bad at. You're just saying, this is something I'm a weakness of, and it could have a very little bit of an effect on my position that I'm trying to go for. That's step one, being able to identify that. But here's the key that I think most people forget, and that is step two. You need to tell them how you've been working on it. You need to explain how you've already identified this, and over the years you have been working on this, and you're working to get better at it. You're still learning, you're still growing, but it is something that you would accept, and this is something that you have been working on. So, like, I've done this for, my dad had this question on a paper interview kind of style thing that he had to write out, and he asked me for some help. And mine was, and by the way, he was going for like an admin position. So I said, you need to use this as your answer. You struggle with you struggle with delegating roles, relinquishing responsibilities, because you come from a time where, that mentality, kind of the old school mentality of, if you want it done right, do it yourself. You grew up with that. So that is something that you struggle with, is being able to let go of some of your responsibilities. However, you've been working on it over the past 5 years on being able to relinquish some of this and stop micromanaging as much. And so that lets them know you understand you do have a weakness. It is relevant. It's not that you work too much, but you are also working on it. That's how you answer that question. That is the way to get the most out of that question. And I promise you will impress them more than anything by answering it in that two-step process.
Excellent approach. Couldn't agree more. Like, give them the problem, make it relevant, show them how you're working on it. Perfect.
Yep.
One last thing we need to address. They
Mhm.
will oftentimes ask you questions, or ask you for questions.
Yep.
Being that, hey, do you have any questions for us? That is an opportunity for you, even if you really don't have any questions naturally. Have some questions, and you
Always
need to,
have two in your back pocket.
right, 2 in your back pocket. And here's the thing: always make sure they're good questions that shows you've done some research. It's not something everybody and his brother would know, right? It actually asks the question in a way that shows you have a lot of knowledge about the company in itself, but also make it something that they can answer. Okay, make it something kind of like that they have experience in, or that they're working on type scenario, but it shows that you've done the research about the company. Like, if you were to ask something about benefits, preface it with, okay, look, here's what I understand about, and here's what I gathered, but from your experience, what is? I understand the position. I've, looked at this. I understand this is the organizational structure, but on a daily basis, what does the average life in the company, average day in your life in the company look like? That type of thing. Those are very specific. Again, it's just a way of showing that you have some information about the company. Okay. You got any others, AJ?
No, I was going to say with that one, I have one go-to question that I always ask in every interview. Well, I used to. I mean, I don't do it as much now, but when I was in college and so on, I had the same question I asked for each interview, and it wasn't so much that I mean, in all honesty, I didn't care what they said, but I wanted them to feel like I cared about what my responsibilities were going to be and what I could do. And my question was always, and this is under the assumption that I'm coming in filling in a role that has already been, established and somebody had already been there. I'm replacing someone. I always asked them, maybe the person before me did a wonderful job, and I hope they did. Is there something I can do to improve on that person's job? And if so, what is it? And again, I didn't honestly care what they said, but it gave them the impression that I really wanted to do good, and I actually wanted to do better than the last person, even if they did good.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me throw a couple more in there in that same vein. Yeah. And this is mainly to, again, create an impression with them. First, ask them, is there anything in my answers to your interview questions, is there anything in what I've said that has given you cause for concern so that perhaps I could explain it better?
That was my other question.
Was it?
Is there any reason why is there any reason why you wouldn't hire me right now? Is there any concern that would cause you from getting me hired right now?
So I would once again be careful about,
of course,
being too direct that way.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Again, if you say, is there anything I've said or any answer I've given to a question that gives you cause for concern about me in this role, I'd like to, talk through it and clarify it, that type of thing. If you do, that's one of those scenarios where if you've got a group of people that are interviewing you and one of them has a problem with you, it's not going to look good for them if you gave them that opening. You gave them that opportunity. You asked for that, and then they didn't give you any opportunity to explain it. They didn't present their concern to you at the time. So it's going to be very difficult for you to stand up and walk out and that one person to say, well, I didn't like this about him. Everybody else is going to look, well, why didn't you just ask him? Right? Yeah. He was sitting right there.
I love that question.
Right.
That's one of my favorite ones.
That's again, a very good one. You got
No, I love that question. And because, again, what it does is the doubts that would have probably held you back from getting to the next level or getting hired has been squashed. You at least leave them with a positive impression of all of their concerns. Even if they are concerns, you still have a way to give a positive outcome afterwards. So I love that question. No, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, I'm going to drop one more then. And this is another psychological, just to say this. Get them thinking about you as the perfect fit for the position. Ask them, in your mind, what are the characteristics or who is the perfect candidate for this position? They will immediately, if you've done well in the interview, they will immediately start naming your characteristics as a good fit for the position. It's just a psychological tendency. You're what's in front of them. You're the most relevant thing. They'll start, again, identifying you with the position. So it's one of those little psychological tricks that can help.
I love the strategy on that.
Yeah, right?
This has been an interesting episode. I mean, it's been a fascinating episode. It's gone a little over time, but it's no big deal. I'm stoked about this one. This has been a fun one. How do you think? What do you think about this one?
I liked it. I thought, we got some good information out there. We could talk about this for days, right? We could give examples for days. We gave that one example, ate up a little too much time, but hopefully that was some entertainment, right? And hopefully it didn't dissuade you from going into strategy.
Somebody's going to now put Bluetooth and toilet paper, and it should be copywritten, right? Because it's going to be on episode, right?
Well, if they want to talk about it like that, maybe so.
All right. Well, before we head out, you got any parting words?
Yep. Visit us on the social media platforms. Check us out on the website. Hit us up on those apps. Let us know. Biggest thing is messages. We need information on what you want us to talk about, because that's what we're here for. Awesome. Well, until next time, y'all have a good one. Goodbye. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.